Welcome to DeborahReed.com, Crafting with Deb. Today, no kiln dichro using just resin. Making faux dichro with resin and polymer clay. Part 1. Vibrant colors. Here's what you need to start. Let's get some black Primo, Fimo, or Sculpey. I prefer Primo. Some Primo, translucent Primo, again, be Sculpey. Adirondack alcohol inks in multiple colors. Your Part A and your Part B, just resin. And some silver leaf. I got this at Michael's, and the package actually contains quite a number of smaller packets of the silver leaf. And these little packets have many pages of silver leaf. And the nice thing is that this silver leaf has a backing paper for when you can burnish it onto your clay. Get out that old pasta machine, and we're going to set it to the first setting, and we're going to condition our clay. So push it through in the first setting, fold it over itself a few times and put it through. I had some old Primo clay that actually crumbled when I put it through, but once I did it the first time, put it through a couple of times, it conditioned itself. Now I've got the clay. I've only gone up to the second setting, and now I'm just going to place my silver leaf on the clay, just enough to cover the whole piece. And then I'll take a burnisher, or in my case a popsicle stick, because I have a ton of them around because of the resin, and I'll start burnishing the silver onto the clay. You just need to rub the areas that the clay is under on the silver. Now the silver leaf is silver down first with your backing paper on top, and then just make sure you go around the sides, around the edges, through the center. And you can always check to see if it's starting to adhere, and you can pick it up and you'll see that it is. And just make sure you go over it good. And then once you've done that, just take a corner and peel up and put the rest to the side because you can use it later on another piece. And I just take my fingers and make sure there's no bubbles. I'll peel it off. And I will put it through at the same setting I just finished with. And that just makes sure that the foil is on my clay. Now I'm going to move it up one. And I'm going to pass it through one way. And because it fits sideways, I'll run it through one more time sideways. And then I will adjust the setting one more setting. It is starting to crackle, but I want a little more effect to the crackle than there is. Run it through. And you'll see that it's crackled. Now I've put it back onto the wax paper, and I'm going to start applying the Adirondack inks. Now the inks give a nice vibrant color, but you could use the Pearl X paints or the Pearl X powders to do the same sort of effect, and I will do a video using those Pearl X later. But in this case we're going to use the inks. And the nice thing with the inks is that they blend. So if you take a blue and you take a pink, you're going to get a very nice purple. This is more of a raspberry that I'm using, along with a blue. Now you can add a third color, a fourth color, whatever you want. Just don't try and get it too muddy. The camera's not really showing the vibrance of the colors. You want to thin it out because obviously when it's thinned out over the silver, the reflection and Makes it look like dichro. So I keep adding, and in some of the lighter spots I'll put some more dark spots, and in some of the darker spots I'll add some of the lighter colors. Just wanted to show you that it doesn't take like 30 seconds to do this. It can take you a few minutes till you're happy with the effect that you've given. I had some lighter or yellows that would have been nice to throw in there because it would have hit some lighter spots. But again, these are only just small pieces, so you can create other ones. I like to create the sheet. Now, we're going to put Primo translucent on top, but you can leave it this way and bake it this way, and it'll be just fine. It'll just give you a different effect. So, I'll just keep playing with this and then I'll let it dry. But in this case, as you're seeing, we're watching real time, and I'm going to put the translucent over it wet. Now we do the same thing with translucent clay. You may want to wipe your rollers to make sure there's no black. Start from the first setting, and we're going to work our way up to the last setting. We want it as thin as tissue paper. Some people actually use wax paper to put it between because you'll get an even thinner piece. Then you have to be careful peeling it off because you can tear it. Although it will not hurt if you put it in pieces on top of your piece. I try to extrude it out so that it's going to cover the shape of my black piece. So I just keep putting it through until that's done. So I'm going to go up to the last setting here, and I'm going to keep putting this through. Make sure it's locked in, or it won't work. I'm going to put it through until I get that tissue paper thin. I want to get it really thin. If you don't get it thin enough, it leaves a cloudy effect when you bake. I'm going to lay this over. I try not to get too many bubbles in, and I'm going to work it out. And once I've got this down and on, I'll work the bubbles all out, and I'll trim it up and get it ready. Because then I will either use my scissors to cut out shapes, or use templates to cut out shapes, or I'll use rubber stamps to cut out some stamp shapes into it. And then once you're finished this, you can either put it in as a sheet the way it is, and then cut it later into pieces, because it's thin enough that you could use scissors or an X-Acto knife to create your pieces. But I like doing it at this stage, cutting it up, because then I can layer other 3D effects with the scraps that I've got left over. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that everything is baked properly. You use the translucent. I like to bake at about 266 degrees for about 45 minutes, and you won't burn it at that stage. You just want to watch that when it does bake, that it has become translucent. It's not going to be shiny. It's going to be dull. It's going to be, you're going to have some color. Just remember that when you're putting on the resin, it's going to make it like a magnifying glass and make it shiny. So the idea here is to make sure there's no inclusions in the top of it. Make sure you poke out all the bubbles and do it. Now after baking, take your same tray and put a piece of wax paper on. And now we're going to take our baked pieces on the tray. Typically, before I put my resins on, I'll sand them and prepare them and get my edges nice and rounded and flatter and get ready. So here I am just placing them in where I'm going to apply. Now we can't apply these to duct tape so they don't slide around when you're trying to apply the resin. Now I've mixed my resin as per my instructions on a 1-to-1 basis, and I'm just applying it with the stick. And I'm using the stick almost like a paintbrush. So I'm going to push this resin around to the edges so that it's completely all over the piece. And then I'll add a little more resin to each piece to get it to dome up a little higher. Now the nice thing with the resin is that you could do these, let them sit for a day or 2 days or whatever, and come back and actually add more to the resin, and you won't see the difference. What I like is on some of these is that I'll come back and I'll actually I'll drill my little holes, and then what I'll do is I'll mix up some resin. Maybe I'm making some extra for something else, and I'll use a little paintbrush and dab it inside the hole so that it makes it a little shinier. I'll go along the edges and maybe even the back to make sure that it's even shinier so that it's more sealed in. I won't do a doming on the back, but you can just paint it on. I have 2 pieces in the foreground here that are 3D, which are all the leftover pieces from the clay, and I stacked them and gave them a more 3D dimensional look. So you could use it like mosaics, so you can cut it up in little pieces and make little mosaics. You can use some tape to go around the edges to make a frame, and you can get the doming up even higher. You can cut pieces together even after they're baked and use them as inclusions into things. Maybe some other jewelry that you're making with resins. And again, I just keep adding some more. You'll see the butterfly that I used a stamp on, and all I did was stamp it and then cut out the trace. Now any of these pieces, like I said, can be drilled, cut, pasted, glued together to make something else. With the resin doming, you can glue a pin back to the back of these pieces. You can bead around them. You can wire wrap them, and they're very light pieces because they're polymer clay, not glass. And they're great for making necklaces or making repeated pieces so they're exact. You can use cookie cutouts. You can do anything with this method. Polymer clay lends itself for easy use. And if I had had this resin 10, maybe 12 years ago, I may not have stopped using polymer clay. So once I finish putting my resin on, and I'll keep adding and dabbing until I'm satisfied with the doming, if you overflow, put your knife underneath it, pick it out, move it to a clean area. Try and take the stick and clean off the edges, and then set it down onto the wax paper. Worst case scenario is that you sand it all off later, and then just use a brush to touch it up and it'll shine again. I do not buff. Now once you've got all your pieces where you want them and they're all coated with the resin that you need, just make sure they're spaced apart in case any little accidents with bumps and the resin drips over the edges. I like to cover it. I have cats and when I live on a farm there's lots of dust. So for the period of time that I've got it on the tray, I just cover it with, in this case I have an aluminum roasting pan. And the nice thing is that when they're on the tray you can move them around and you don't have to worry that you're going to bump them or do whatever. And you can put them out of the way. Now, it takes 24 hours for these to cure properly, 48 for them to be solid. As you can see how nice they look and the dichroic effect you get. It's almost like ink staining. Thank you for visiting DeborahReed.com, Faux Dichro.